There are things that we file away, not consciously, not deliberately, but somewhere along the way, the mind finds a drawer for the things that are too much for us to look at, and it closes it and it gets on with things. And for a long time, that works, kind of. And then something, a therapist, a diagnosis, a moment of stillness that you weren't expecting opens that drawer, and you realise the things that you thought you'd filed away weren't really filed at all. They were just waiting. And that's where I am right now. And today I want to talk about it honestly, because I think a lot of people in this community are carrying things that they filed away too. And I think we deserve to know that there are ways through. So today I want to walk you through it, what EMDR actually is, what it's been like for me, and why I think ADHD and trauma are so tangled together, how hard it still is to access, and the small things that are starting to shift. And I want to say it clearly right at the start before anything else. Everything in this episode, it's my own personal experience. This is not medical advice, and it is not a recommendation for what you should do. It is one neurodivergent woman talking honestly about what has helped her. So if any of this resonates, you have somewhere to start a conversation with a professional who can tell you whether it might help you too. And a gentle heads up before we go any further, this one really does talk about trauma and therapy. And if that is a bit tender for you today, I want you to look after yourself first. So skip it or come back to it when you're ready. There's no pressure here. So I actually started with CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. I've talked about it before. It's helped me with intrusive thoughts, the imposter syndrome, the inner voice that tells me I'm going to get found out and lose everything. But my therapist is really, really good. And early on, maybe I think it was our second session, something happened that changed the direction of everything for me. I was talking about my history and I became really tearful, telling her all the things that I'd always sort of believed about myself. And this was like the body dysmorphia, the drive that means I genuinely cannot stop and relax, and I always have to be doing something. And she asked me a simple question. She asked me, where did that all come from? And I told her I grew up in a single parent household on benefits, and I made myself a promise very young that I would never let my children grow up in that situation. I would work, I would show them how important that was, and I would encourage them to do the same. And here's the thing that I want to be really honest about. The issue was never that I was working hard or that I wanted better for my children. The issue was the extremeness of it. It was the late nights, the staying away from home, the constant rehearsing in my head, every single reaction, every outcome, every way that anything could possibly go wrong. And what I've only just really understood through therapy, what I didn't understand at the time, is that I wasn't actually protecting my children from the situation I grew up in. I was protecting them from the trauma I experienced as a child, and those two are not the same thing. I spent decades treating them as though they were. And I am still struggling with this now, to work a standard 40-hour week, because that drive, that need to always be doing more, proving more, earning the right to exist in a stable life has been ingrained in me for years. And it doesn't just undo itself because I now understand where that comes from. We're also working on something else, the sensitivity I have around criticism, the RSD side of things. And I want to give you a real example because it might actually land for you. Someone can say something as small as, "Oh, you've changed your hair," and just leave it there. No judgment in their voice, nothing negative said. And I'm left panicking, like, oh my gosh, What's wrong with my hair? What have I done? What does this mean? And it runs so much deeper than the hair. It runs into everything. Maybe you know exactly the feeling, but it kind of puts you into almost like that outcast situation again that I felt, I guess, so often as a child. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I know it sounds so clinical and slightly alarming, but here's the plain English version. It's a therapy that helps the brain reprocess traumatic memories, not by talking about them in detail, but by working with the body's response to them. The idea that some memories get stuck, they don't get processed the way other memories do, and they keep triggering the same emotional and physical responses, even years later, even when that situation is long gone. EMDR uses something called bilateral stimulation. In my case, we use tapping while holding on to a difficult memory in mind. What that seems to do broadly is help the brain do something similar to what happens naturally during your REM sleep, processing and integrating things that have essentially got stuck. And it's not a fringe either. EMDR is recommended by NICE, the body that sets treatment guidelines for the NHS, as a treatment for PTSD in adults. It was developed by a psychologist called Francine Chapereau, I hope I said that right, back in the late 80s. And it's been studied a great deal since then. And I want to be very clear about something here, and I mean this genuinely, not as a disclaimer, but EMDR is not something that you should ever attempt alone. It is not something to explore through YouTube videos or apps without guidance. It opens up things that need to be opened with a trained professional beside you who knows how to hold the space and knows what to do when something comes up that you perhaps weren't expecting. So please, if any of this today does resonate, talk to a professional first. Let them explain it to you. Let them help you decide if it's the right thing for you. There are different types of therapy and different approaches, and what works for one person may not be what's needed for another. So do go gently and do get guided through it. I want to tell you something that I haven't really said before, that this isn't the first time that I had tried therapy. Years ago, around my wedding, I tried CBT and it didn't go the way that it's going now. So many boxes got opened and so many emotions came out all at once, faster than I could actually process them, and I couldn't handle it. So I stopped. I boxed everything back up, sealed it, and that's where it had stayed untouched until I started the therapy again, following on from my ADHD diagnosis. And I think it's important to say that out loud. I don't want anyone to just think that therapy is something that you only do once and that's it and it's done. Sometimes it doesn't go well the first time. Sometimes you're not quite ready. Sometimes the protective walls that you've built are doing exactly what they need to do in that moment, and the work just has to wait. But this time it felt different, and I thought about why that is, and I think it's partly because I had detached myself so completely. I'd built up such elaborate coping mechanisms, masks, walls, and this time I was finally being allowed to lower them slowly, a little at a time, though to be honest, I will say it didn't always stay little. Sometimes I release a small amount and then an entire wall comes tumbling down at once. But overall, this time I have felt far more equipped, more ready and more held. And that difference, it matters. If your first attempt at any kind of trauma therapy hasn't gone well, it doesn't mean it never will work for you. It might mean that the timing wasn't quite right, and it might mean that you might need a different therapist, a different pace, a different amount of safety built in around you first. So please don't let one difficult experience, close that door permanently. But also, please don't push yourself back into it before you're ready either. I want to describe a particular moment, because I think the abstract explanation will only ever go so far. And the first time I really didn't understand the connection, and I still find it hard, honestly, to really understand exactly what's going on and how on earth tapping helps, the mechanism of it. But I remember thinking about a particular feeling and noticing that my stomach was hurting, my heart was racing, I felt pressure in my head, and the tapping was like really fast at first. As we kept going and repeating the rhythm, I physically struggled to keep up with it. It started slowing, not because the therapist slowed it, but because something inside of me, I guess, was changing in real time. And I can just remember these tears streaming and thinking, this isn't working. This is just upsetting me for absolutely no reason. But having done more sessions now, I can genuinely see the impact across all parts of my life, not in one dramatic before and after moment. It's more like in small accumulating shifts that I only really notice when I look back, and it's hard. I won't pretend otherwise. The days that a session can feel raw, you've opened something that it just doesn't close again neatly when the session ends. And it is hard, I won't pretend otherwise. The days after a session can feel really raw. Think of it like you've opened up something and it doesn't just close away neatly once the session ends. I feel really teary, very emotional, and genuinely very drained. I find it hard to manage any conflict, and with 3 children close in age who bicker the way siblings do, that's a real practical everyday challenge, not an abstract one. And I think for those of us with ADHD, and particularly for those of us that do struggle with RSD, that the rawness can feel more intense, because we already feel things really deeply, and we already have a nervous system that is wired for sensitivity. Opening old trauma on top of that requires care and support from the right people around you. And something I'm still understanding, still working through, but my sense is that they are together deeply linked, at least in my case, because when I think about RSD, the thing when a perceived rejection hits you so completely and so fast that your rational brain can't intercept it. I think about where that might have come from. What experiences might have taught my nervous system that rejection is catastrophic? What happened at some point that made a fear of being too much, a fear of being found out, of losing everything, so total and so immediate? The ADHD likely made me more vulnerable to certain situations and experiences, and those experiences likely heightened the ADHD symptoms. They fed each other, and they still do in some ways. And the EMDR is helping me find, I guess, the root of it. Not change the past, but to change what the past is still doing in the present. And I do want to be very careful here and say it again very clearly. Having ADHD does not mean you have trauma. Having ADHD does not mean you need EMDR. These are very separate things. What I'm sharing is just my experience, and my experience is absolutely not a template. But of course, I love a fact and a figure, so I want to share some research here, because I think to give you the context is always really helpful. And there's a genuine access problem here that I think deserves to be named. Autistic individuals are at significantly greater risk of experiencing adverse and traumatic life events across their lifespan than the general population. That's well established across the research. And yet there is no single standardised EMDR autism protocol. There isn't even a separate official version of this therapy built specifically for neurodivergent brains. What experienced therapists do when they know what they're doing is adapt the existing EMDR framework to fit each person's sensory, cognitive and communication needs individually. A major UK study surveyed 103 EMDR therapists and asked them about the barriers autistic people face when trying to access and benefit from EMDR. And they identified 4 different categories: things related to the client, things related to the therapist, differences in how the therapeutic relationship would form, and the broader systemic issues. And separately, research into mental health support more widely has found that a lack of therapist knowledge about autism or an unwillingness to change their approach is the single most commonly reported barrier for autistic people in accessing any of the psychological treatment, not just EMDR, that's any of it. And there's a real access gap in the NHS specifically. In 22 to 23, NHS talking therapies delivered over 30,000 courses of trauma-focused CBT for PTSD, and only around 6,700 courses of EMDR. EMDR is significantly harder to access through any standard NHS pathways than CBT is. If you want it specifically, you may need to ask for it directly more than once as well, and be prepared to push for it. The genuinely hopeful piece of news is that there is now a dedicated neurodivergent and EMDR special interest group within the EMDR UK, set up specifically to help therapists learn how to adapt their practice for autistic and ADHD clients. So if you're looking for a therapist, that's worth searching for someone specifically trained in neurodivergent affirming EMDR, because they're going to understand things about your processing style that a generalist might miss entirely. I want to tell you what's actually shifting, because I think that matters just as much as the hard parts. I do feel like it's given me more confidence to be me, and maybe more importantly, it's helping me work out what is actually me and what is this mask that I have built in a response to all of the old trauma. The perfectionism in particular is something I am really genuinely trying to work on right now, trying to catch it, trying to ask in the moment whether the standard I'm holding myself to is mine, or whether or not it's the standard of a frightened child built to keep her family safe a very long time ago. And I don't have this solved, I want to be honest about that, but I can see the shape of it now in a way that I really couldn't before. And seeing the shape of something is the first step of being able to put it down. I think this whole process has made me really realise, more than anything else, what I want for my children. I want them to grow up understanding from the start that therapy is good and healthy. It's not something to access when you're in crisis as a last resort, after everything else has failed. Something normal, something that exists alongside everything else, the way exercise does, the way rest does. And I want to reduce their trauma, of course, as much as I possibly can. Now, no one is perfect. I will get things wrong, undoubtedly. I already have, I'm sure, plenty of times. And I've talked about that in other episodes, but if I can be their safe space, if they can be entirely and completely themselves with me, without me putting my own history onto them, and if I can accept them exactly as they are, then I hope they grow up with more self-esteem and confidence than I had, because I didn't have it. I had to pretend I did, and for a very long time that performance has cost me more than I understood until very recently. And I don't want that for them. I want them to never have to learn to perform confidence they don't feel. I want the confidence to just be there, built in for them, because somebody believed in them from the start without any conditions. And I want to be clear about something here, because again, I do think this matters, as everything I say I believe matters. This isn't about what my children have been through. This is about what I went through long before they existed, and how I'm working to make sure that it doesn't become theirs too. And that's really what I'm working towards, not the perfection, just that. Not the perfection, just that. If anything in this episode today has landed for you, if you recognise yourself in it, please do talk to someone. Your GP is a brilliant starting point. A therapist who specialises in trauma is even better. If you're looking for if you're neurodivergent, look for someone specifically with experience adapting EMDR or trauma therapy for neurodivergent clients. And the EMDR UK Neurodivergent Special Interest Group is a really good place to start searching. Tell them what you're carrying and ask them what they think might help. Let them explain the options and let them help you decide. But just don't open those boxes alone. And if you're in the middle of this kind of work right now, if you're in therapy, if you're processing something, if you're in the tender days after a session that has perhaps opened up something unexpected for you, I just want to say this to you. You're doing something incredibly brave, and it really does count, even when it doesn't feel like it counts. Come and find us over in the Weighted Blanket community over on Facebook, and every question I ask every guest, I want to ask it of you too. What do you wish someone had told you before you had to figure it out the hard way? Come and tell me. You're not alone. I'll see you in the next one.